have learned about lipids before, you probably have associated them with fats. If you have related fats with lipids, then you are right. But waxes, oil, steroids and phospholipids are also lipids. Lipids are macromolecules, or you can say large molecules made up of long hydrocarbon chains. And the lipids are a group of hydrophobic biomolecules that play important role in living organisms. They are exclusively made up of hydrogen and carbon. These long hydrocarbon chains give lipids their non-polar property, which means they are not soluble in water. The main function of lipid is to store energy for a long period of time. And they are also used for protection, insulation, lubrication. They also act as precursor for some hormones. In general, there are 4 basic groups of lipids, and they are triglycerides, phospholipids, steroids, and waxes. Although these groups of lipids differ in many respects, they all have one common characteristic, and that is they are all insoluble in water. This is why oil separates out from water when mixed with water. So when you hear that lipids are hydrophobic, this basically means that water and lipids do not mix at all. Now let us talk about the basic groups of lipids. First one we have is triglycerides, which includes fats and oils. You might have seen fats of animals like cheese and butters. They are solid at room temperature and are used by animals for insulation, protection and long-term energy storage. And oils such as mustard oil, olive oil are liquid at room temperature, and the oils are used by plants for long-term energy storage. Now let us discuss about the components of triglycerides. At molecular level, triglycerides contains 2 types of subunits, and they are glycerol and fatty acid. One of the most common components of certain lipids is the fatty acid. A fatty acid is only a small portion of triglyceride. To become a triglyceride, 3 separate fatty acids have to bond with glycerol molecules through the process of dehydration synthesis. A fatty acid has 3 main parts: a chain of carbon and hydrogen called hydrocarbon chain, methyl group at one end, and acidic group at other end. A fatty acid that has only single carbon-to-carbon bond are saturated fatty acid, and they are called saturated fatty acid because the carbon chain is saturated with all the hydrogen atoms it can hold. Unsaturated fatty acid have one to several double bonds between 2 adjacent carbon atoms, and the double bond results kinks in the fatty acid chains, and the double bonds affects the melting point of fats. As we have discussed before, the animal fats are solid at room temperature, adding the fact that they have got saturated fatty acid. You can say fatty acid with single bond between 2 adjacent carbon atoms. Vegetable oils are made up of unsaturated fatty acid with 1 or many bonds between adjacent carbon atoms. And the other example of unsaturated fatty acid is a trans fat. And the trans fat are the fatty acid where the hydrogen atoms are on opposite sides of double bonds. Trans fat are usually formed during the production of processed foods and are also very common in partially hydrogenated oils. In order to increase the shelf life and melting point of the fat, excess hydrogen atoms are in unsaturated oils. This causes the formation of trans bands in the fatty acid chain. Unfortunately, the consumption of trans bands of fats have been associated with the cardiovascular diseases. Another molecule that incorporates the fatty acid chain is the phospholipid. The similarity of phospholipid with glyceride is it is made up of glycerol and fatty acid, and the difference is only 2 separate fatty acids are present in phospholipids, while 3 separate fatty acids are present in glycerides. In phospholipid, rather than third fatty acid, the phosphate group is present, and the phosphate group is attached to the third carbon of glycerol. And the phospholipid is most famous for its formation of phospholipid bilayer. A phospholipid has a single polar phosphate head and 2 nonpolar fatty acid tails. Phosphate head of molecules is hydrophilic or water-loving. It mixes well with water. However, the fatty acid tails are hydrophobic or water-hating, and they do not mix well with water. Because of these unique properties, the nonpolar tails are attracted to each other and the heads are attracted to the water solution in and out of the cell. That's why it forms a phospholipid bilayer. And this phospholipid bilayer is the major components of plasma membrane of the cell. The phospholipid bilayer protects a cell from outside intrusions. Now let us talk about steroids. Just like other lipids, steroids are hydrophobic and are not soluble in water. Unlike other lipid molecules, steroids do not contain fatty acid. They have 4 fused cyclic rings of carbon atoms to which different functional groups are attached. And the example of steroids are cholesterol and cortisol. Steroids have many functions throughout the body, including the presence of steroid hormones like progesterone and testosterone. Both of them are formed from cholesterol. Cholesterol is present in plasma membrane where it stabilizes the membrane. And the last one is wax. Waxes have variety of unique structure and are found in the feathers of some birds, outer surface of animals, also in the protective coating of leaf of different plants. Wax is also produced in the ears of some animals in order to protect the eardrum. Waxes are non-polar and they repel water.